On the podcast today is Dr. Jeff Ross. He is the founder of Vailshire. Did I say that right?
You got it right. Yep.
Capital. And he also is a radiologist. So yet another MD who is in hedge funds. We won't mention the other one who doesn't look anything like Christian Bale, but I'm sure I'm certain maybe some other people have actually mentioned the fact that there's a doctor that's in a hedge fund and you're a doctor that's in a hedge fund. Has anybody else ever just made mention of the fact that that's the case?
It gets brought up here and there. I'm sure
it does. So, how long have you been in radiology? First of all, congratulations, because you, in a tweet you sent out, said, hopefully this is the last Sunday rounds of radiology that I'll ever have to do.
Yes.
So that's probably been a long time coming. Tell me about that.
Yeah, sure. So I got out of training. I trained as a diagnostic radiologist and did a fellowship in interventional radiology, which I finished in 2008. And then we moved out to Colorado Springs right after that. So I've been practicing since 2008. It's kind of a long story, but I started Vailshire. I founded that in 2013 and then started managing my hedge fund and separately managed accounts in 2014. So I've been doing both of those things since then.
So have you slept since then? Because that sounds like two things that are pretty time intensive.
I don't sleep much. I've aged a lot in these last 8 years. So, but yeah, I'm finally retiring from radiology at the end of September. So just a few more weeks.
That's fantastic. So with the free time, do you have any hobbies that you enjoy doing, or have you just really put that on the back burner?
Not, and especially since I discovered Bitcoin, that kind of took over everything else. So I hang out with my wife and my kids, and then I do Vailshire, talk about Bitcoin and study it and do radiology. That's kind of my life in a nutshell.
And then you're on Clubhouse, so you really don't sleep, because that's an addictive process, because you just start getting into conversations. I know that I've got to be very careful.
Right.
Because I can stay up until 2 a.m.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So you started Vailshire in, you said 13.
Yep.
And so it's been 8 years now that you've been pulling double duty.
Yes.
So what does that process look like as far as building a business and having the radiology practice at the same time?
Well, that's a good question. So it actually started further back in 2008 when I came to Colorado Springs and I was finally out of training and just working as a private practice doctor. So I was on call every fourth night, which kept me busy. But I always loved investing. And so when I finally was free from my training, I started a website or a blog teaching people how to invest on their own. And that took off a bit, and I got discovered by the Motley Fool way back in the day and started writing for them, and then did some writing for Seeking Alpha. And then enough of the people who read my work were interested in me managing their money, and I'd always say, "Oh no, I'm just a doctor. I don't do this for real. This is just kind of for fun." But it stuck into my brain because people kept asking me about it. I thought, well, if I could do this for real, I would actually kind of enjoy it. And so about 2011 or 12, I started looking into what it would take to run a hedge fund and to start an RIA. And then, like I said, so 2013, I founded it. 2014, started managing it. It got really intense. So by 2015, I had to give up doing interventional radiology. And that was because I had to be on call every fourth night for that, which kept me too busy. And so I finally gave that up and did just radiology since then. So it's been intense. So right now you can see behind me, these monitors here, those are where I do my radiology work from home. I actually work for a New York group, and I do that all day. Yep. And then after hours, I do Vailshire, and I have every Friday off to do Vailshire as well. So
COVID has changed the way medicine is done. So you're actually able to work from home and work remotely, basically halfway across the country.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a pretty nice deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it. So now that you've got the free time, what are you going to be focused on, really?
Well, managing Vailshire more seriously, and when I say more seriously, I mean just being able to spend much more time reading. When I read things right now, I whip through an article in about 30 seconds, and I would rather spend 10 minutes reading it. So instead of skimming, I plan on reading and spending a little more in-depth time. I love teaching people about Bitcoin. I love teaching people about investing wisely in general. Bitcoin came along and changed the whole paradigm, as you obviously know very well. And so that just completely changed the way I think and the way that I think people need to think about savings and investing and and just about money in general. And so I love teaching people. So I'd love to spend more time writing and speaking on these issues in the future.
That's great. So in the process of Vailshire, when did that hit you?
So I was one of those people. I came in as basically a speculator in the crypto space in 2016. And I came because of the high risk, high rewards situation that I saw back then. I didn't know the difference between Bitcoin and Litecoin, and the Bitcoin fork wars were going on at that time. I barely understood what they were talking about, other than, they kind of wanted to make it bigger or something, or make it easier to use. That was kind of the extent of it. So I was a trader back then, much to my chagrin, because I traded all of my Bitcoin away for these other altcoins. And then, as we know, in 2017, everything went way up, and then they all crashed in 2018. And I was stuck with no Bitcoin and a huge tax bill in 2018. And it was a painful lesson for me. So then It wasn't until, exactly. So it wasn't until 2019 that I came back to Bitcoin. And then at that point, I went down the rabbit hole, put the time in. Read, I followed, if you know Preston Pish, he's a great value investor, and he kind of went along that spectrum and finally discovered Bitcoin, and then went down the rabbit hole. So I went down at about the same time he did. And then when I read Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, that was what basically put me over the top. And so since 2019, I've been educating my own clients about Bitcoin.
Now, I did some peeking on the website, and I noticed that you have a pretty hefty percentage of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as part of the hedge fund that you manage. When did you actually begin to offer that as part of your programs?
Yeah, so it's funny. Way back in 2017, I had tiny bits of it because it was so volatile. I would put like 0.5% of my fund in there, and it didn't make much of a difference. It made a little bit of a difference, but not much. And then I took a break from it for a year or two. When I came back in 2019, it's sort of funny, but I went from 0 to 1, and that was kind of the biggest move. And then we snuck up to about 3%, and then to 5%. And then as I kept teaching my clients, they went from being very skeptical of it and kind of scared about Bitcoin and the volatility to most of them now can't get enough of it. So we kept going up higher and higher and higher. And as my conviction grew and as their conviction grew as well, we got to higher and higher levels of it. So I have extreme confidence in it at this point, as far as where it's going in the future. So I feel very comfortable with large positions in Bitcoin and Bitcoin related entities.
Well, that leads me to my next question, which is what is the future of money? And in asking that, I'll kind of subhead it with this. Do you see Bitcoin as being the dominant currency, or do you see some sort of a hybrid with other fiat still existing in a future monetary system?
It depends how far ahead we look. I think within the next 10 years, we have, and the hybrid's a perfect word, because I tell people it's sort of like cars. You think of the internal combustion engine to the weird, quirky hybrids that we have now that don't really do either thing that well. And then we flip over to electric vehicles. Similar to that, I think, is going to happen with Bitcoin. I think what happens is Bitcoin continues to grow in prominence, and very rapidly. I think we're going to see exponential acceptance and growth of the network. And then I think we have a hybrid system of Bitcoin as the reserve asset, as the base currency, and then we keep the U.S. dollar and probably the Chinese renminbi and other things. The strongest currencies, I think, stick around as medium of exchanges for a time. And I don't like to speculate too far because it ruffles a lot of feathers, but I think at some point we realize we probably don't need these other currencies so much, because when you have the Lightning Network and second and third layer solutions, I don't know that we need those so much. There's a lot of debate about that right now. But I think as long as we have this, centralized, secure, safe monetary network that we have in Bitcoin, it's going to be a very different world and a much better world because of this monetary system.
Yeah, I'll throw an opinion in there as far as that's concerned. Is I think that as opposed to gold, which almost had to have somebody else have custody of it because it just couldn't be moved, Bitcoin's self-custody capabilities really changes the game. I think that fiat really has to measure up to Bitcoin as a store of value and as a sound money more than it did with gold, because there's really no reason that I can see, and I'm talking to a hedge fund manager, so obviously you would see more than I would. There's really no reason that I can see for anybody to not utilize Bitcoin, especially now with the layer 2, as their main store of value, means of exchange, and ultimately, finally, a unit of account.
Yes,
because that's the last hurdle that I see that Bitcoin has to go over, is to actually have things priced in Bitcoin. So.
Yeah, and to me, I think that's inevitable. And honestly, I think it's going to happen sooner than most people would like to believe. The way that the network is growing and becoming accepted, I just tweeted something earlier out today. It looks like about 3% of the world is into crypto and predominantly Bitcoin so far, and that's about doubling every year. It's actually more than doubling at the current rate from this year. But so say it's doubling. That puts us, if you go 3 to 6% to 12 to 24 to 48 to 96% in about 5 or 6 years, I think it's going to become accepted throughout the world and become ubiquitous much sooner than most people expect. And it may be that soon that we see this hyper Bitcoinization and using Bitcoin as the unit of account, as you say.
Well, you kind of jumped past what the next question was, because I was just straight up put you on the spot. 2021, end of 2021 price prediction.
End of 2021, I think 6 digits is probable. So I'm looking at 100,000 as kind of a base case. It's possible we're a little below that. That would be a little disappointing and a little slow. But I do think 100, and I would not be surprised if we were as high as somewhere between 300,000 to 500,000 even by the end
of this year.
By the end of this year.
What are the fundamentals that make you say so?
Based on kind of past experiences, the past cycles. So first of all, we've done these very clear 4-year cycles that are based on the halvings back in 2013, 2017. If it follows a similar pattern, especially to 2013, because we had the mid-cycle pullback just like we did in 2013. In 2013, it went on from September through November. It went up more than 10x in those 3 months after the pullback. So a 10x from here would be incredible, but not unprecedented. And that would put us obviously at about $450,000 to $500,000. It's possible. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I wouldn't actually be surprised if it did happen.
All right. New people to the space, and obviously my audience through 99 Bitcoins, and the audience that I'm really trying to continue to help educate, and I think that you're trying to help educate as well. I'll ask this: best way to get into the space, specifically how to buy your first Bitcoin. How to buy your first. There's so many good methods now. So I used to tell everybody to go to Coinbase because Coinbase is very easy to use and to get on. I don't love how much they shill all the other coins. I wish they would kind of focus a little bit more on Bitcoin. If people are just really hungry to learn about Bitcoin, I like to direct them to Swan Bitcoin because it's easy to use and it has a lot of good educational resources. If they're kind of fintech savvy, I'll direct them to Square and now to Strike, Jack Mallers' app. Is a new, which you probably know, is built on the Lightning Network and is a great system. So now I'm starting to. It depends where they are and who they are and how savvy they are, but I usually push them to one of those exchanges. Okay. Other than the Bitcoin Standard, other books to read that you would suggest for people that are new to the space? But unrelated to Bitcoin, sort of, is The Sovereign Individual. Okay. I think that's an important book to read, and it kind of gets to the sort of philosophy and the ethos of the Bitcoin community. Bitcoin Standard is great. I'm a Christian, so I don't like to cuss, but Jason Williams' book, Bitcoin, the Hard Money You Can't F With, sure. Yep. is a great book, and it's written for kind of beginners as well, and he does a great job explaining. I think all of those are great. And honestly, there's so many good you have a fantastic podcast, a great educational suite of content. So you can go from knowing nothing to learning a lot about Bitcoin in a very short time. And then I would just throw Preston Pish and his podcast into there as well. He has a lot of great Bitcoin content. Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to ask you is outside of the books, what are the other podcasters or influencers that you would suggest somebody follow either on Twitter or any of the other social media so that they can get more education and even some conversation when you talk about Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse?
Right. Yeah, that's another great new invention, Clubhouse, and I spend a lot of more time now on Twitter Spaces, and so a lot of these people, you can just sit there and hang out and listen to them if you want. You can go up on stage and ask them questions directly. It's fantastic. If you're a beginner and you're hungry to learn, the sky's the limit.
Are you going to start a podcast or anything? Or you're going to kind of stick to Clubhouse and Spaces right now?
I think I'm just going to do that. There's so much good Bitcoin content out there already. Great podcasts like yours, and I don't want to compete with great people like you and other guys, because we all kind of do the same thing, and we sort of know it's a small community. I think we tend to know a lot of the same people, and so I like to just kind of help out different people. And right now, I think there's a bit of a gap or a need on Twitter Spaces for good Bitcoin content. So I think I'll focus on there more and let the experts like you do the fantastic podcasts.
You are too kind. But for those who would want to follow you, how can people get in touch with you on social media?
Sure. So 2 ways. One, if you want to learn more about my investment style and what we do at Vailshire, just go to vailshire.com. And then I'm on Twitter all the time. My handle is at Vailshire Cap, or you can just look up Dr. Jeff Ross. And I'm wide open to people. If you want to ask me questions, you can DM me or email me. I'm always happy to talk to anybody.
And I will second that, because Dr. Ross on Twitter Spaces and on Clubhouse, I've been in rooms with you before. It's always a pleasant conversation, and I always find a nugget or two in the conversations that we have on those platforms. So, Dr. Jeff Ross, I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast here on Why Bitcoin, and I hope that we have an opportunity to do it again.
That would be awesome. I really appreciate what you do, Nate, and thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks for joining me here on the Why Bitcoin podcast, and I hope that you've enjoyed the portion of the conversation that I brought to you here on the YouTube channel. Consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel if you want to see some more. And if there's somebody that you'd like to see me interview later, then go ahead and leave that name in the comment section below. I look forward to seeing you again.